War will often result in the development of many devious, ingenious, and cruel weapons to gain advantage over an enemy. During World War II, a particularly cruel and altogether strange weapon that was cooked up was exploding anti-tank dogs. Hundreds of dogs were trained by Soviet handlers to run under German tanks whilst carrying explosives that would detonate on contact. In today's video, we will briefly cover this disturbing example of weapons development. The origin of bomb dogs can be traced back to 1924. This was the year the Soviet Revolutionary War Council authorized the use of dogs in the military. Their initial roles were envisioned to be what you might expect, to be used as attack dogs, for mine detection, and for search and rescue missions. It is often said that the Soviet Union turned to using bomb dogs as a sign of desperation in the face of Nazi blitzkrieg. Whilst the offensive may have led to a need to deploy dogs, the plans for bomb dogs began in the 1930s. The plan was to use Alsatians who would carry the explosives to the tank. It was hoped the dog would be able to drop the bomb using its teeth to release a specially designed belt. The bomb would either be on a timer or be remotely detonated, with the dog hopefully returning unharmed. This, however, presented problems. If the bomb was on a timer, there was a danger the dog might return to the handler without depositing the bomb with the enemy. As remote detonators were expensive, this too proved unreliable. What's more, the dogs would not be able to master the tasks required, meaning another solution was needed. Instead, the program was shifted to where the goal would be that the dog remains with the explosive until detonation at the target. The dogs were trained to dive under the tanks. This was achieved by a Pavlovian response by starving the dogs and then placing meat under the tanks. The dog would begin to associate food with diving under the tanks. After the dog had mastered this, the dog would be trained to carry out the task, all while the tank was moving and whilst guns were being fired, to acclimatize the dog to the horrific sounds of battle. Next, the anti-tank bomb was redesigned. The bomb would be placed on the sides of the dog and was fitted with an upward pointing lever. When the dog would run under the enemy tank, the wooden lever would be pulled, pulling out the safety pin and causing the striker to detonate the bomb. Following the Nazi invasion of the Soviet Union, there was a need to stop the Nazi blitzkrieg advance. There were, however, a number of shortcuts taken in the training of the first batch of anti-tank dogs. In a bid to save fuel and equipment, the dogs were not trained with a live exercise or a moving tank. This meant that in the heat of battle, the dogs would not dive under the moving tanks, with some even waiting in vain for the tanks to halt. In some instances, the dogs fled back to the Soviet trenches, detonating the explosives and killing Soviet soldiers. This initial encounter resulted in the damaging of only a few German tanks, but more instances of dogs harming their handlers. After this initial debacle, some trainers who voiced their displeasure at the Soviet command ended up in the gulags. The effectiveness of the Soviet anti-tank dogs is not entirely clear. There are some claims that at least 300 German tanks were destroyed in the early years of the war, providing a necessary and vital role in stemming the Nazi advance. However, in all likelihood, this figure is an exaggeration, as the real number of destroyed tanks is likely no more than a few dozen. What's more, the Soviets trained the bomb dogs with Soviet tanks which ran on diesel engines. When confronted with unfamiliar petrol-powered German tanks, the dogs would instead head for the Soviet tanks. Some documented examples of the success of bomb dogs include the Battle of Kursk, where 16 bomb dogs disabled 12 German tanks that had broken through Soviet lines, or that dogs were used to deliver explosives into bunkers or under tanks during the Battle of Stalingrad. But by the start of 1942, German forces had captured dog trainers and learned much about the program. German soldiers were instructed to shoot any dog on sight in combat zones. By 1942, the use of bomb dogs thankfully declined, with more conventional weapons favoured. Animals have long been part of human warfare. From rampaging war elephants to cavalry charges, countless animals have died fighting for wars that they could not understand. Yet, the use of bomb dogs during World War II seems to strike an emotive chord. Dogs are often referred to as man's best friend, and so to strap an explosive device to the unwitting animal has a level of cruelty that many people, including your humble narrator, cannot begin to fathom.